Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at a fast food joint. It's not exactly where I saw my life going. A year ago, I was in cybersecurity, handling network defenses, tracking intrusions, and making sure companies didn't get their data stolen. I was good at it too. But being good at something doesn't always mean you stay on top. I found something I wasn't supposed to. A breach, one big enough to ruin lives. Thousands of people had their personal data exposed, and when I reported it, I expected to be treated like a whistleblower. A hero, maybe. Instead, my career was torched overnight. I was blacklisted from every firm that mattered, my reputation smeared with just enough corporate spin to make sure no one would hire me. So I left. I packed what little I had, got in my car, and drove until I landed here. It wasn't a fresh start. It was survival. The only job I could get was at a 24-hour fast food joint, the kind where the floors are always slick, the air smells like burnt grease, and the customers range from tired parents to drunk college kids. The pay was garbage, but it was quiet at night, and I needed quiet. The thing is, this McDonald's is in a tiny, remote area, too far from any main roads, too hidden away from the hustle of other towns. I'm the only one here most of the time. The company runs it on the slim hope someone might pass by during the graveyard shift. People around here aren't exactly the late-night crowd, so it's not uncommon for hours to pass without a soul in sight. My first night on the job, I was in the back office trying to figure out how the payroll system worked when I noticed something wedged under a stack of old employee files. A notebook. The cover was cracked and peeling, the pages yellowed like it had been there for years. I flipped through it, expecting to find old schedules or training notes, but the writing inside was hurried, almost frantic. It was a list of rules. I thought it was a joke at first, some leftover prank from an old employee, but the more I read, the more unsettled I felt. The handwriting was shaky in places, like someone had been in a rush or afraid. Some pages had smudges. Grease stains, maybe. Others had marks that looked too much like fingernail imprints, like someone had gripped the edges too hard while writing. And then there were the rules themselves. Rule 1, the drive-thru closes at midnight. If a car pulls up after that, do not approach the window. No matter what they say, do not make eye contact. Rule 2, if you hear a knock on the freezer door, slide a single fry under it. Do not open it. Rule 3, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the fry machine will turn on by itself. Whatever comes out is not food. Do not touch it. Rule 4. If the Ronald McDonald statue moves, leave the store for exactly 5 minutes. Do not look back through the glass. Rule 5. Never ask what's in the special sauce. Rule 6. If your reflection lags in the fryer station mirror, leave the kitchen immediately. If it smiles at you, run. I stared at the page for a long time. It had to be a joke. But the thing is, who writes a joke like this and then hides it under a stack of files? If it was just some dumb prank, why did it feel so wrong? I glanced around the office, suddenly aware of how quiet the store was. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Something in my gut told me I wasn't going to like working here. But I needed the job, so I shut the notebook, took a deep breath, and told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. It was around 12:20 a.m. when I heard the tires. The sound was subtle, barely noticeable over the hum of the kitchen equipment, but I caught it. A slow roll over asphalt. I turned my head slightly, glancing at the drive-thru monitor. A car had pulled up to the speaker. My stomach twisted. The drive-thru was closed. The car itself looked wrong, an old boxy sedan, the kind that should have broken down years ago. The windows were caked in grime. Streaks of dirt running down the glass like something had been smeared across it over and over. The driver sat motionless. I couldn't make out much, just a shadowy figure behind the wheel, their posture rigid, head tilted forward slightly. Too still. Then the intercom crackled to life. A voice rasped through, thin, strained like someone forcing words through cracked lips. I'm hungry, please. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a plea. It was flat, cold. Something about the way they spoke made my skin crawl, like they were just saying the words because they knew that's what they were supposed to say. I didn't move, didn't speak. The rule was clear: do not approach the window, do not make eye contact. So I stood there, watching from the reflection in the fry station's stainless steel. The driver still wasn't moving. No impatient shifting, no drumming of fingers on the steering wheel, just that same unnatural stillness. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. Then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the car was gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. I stared at the empty drive-through lane, my pulse hammering in my ears. Slowly, I reached for the monitor, scrolling back through the footage. Static. The car hadn't been recorded arriving. There was no evidence it had ever been there at all. I swallowed hard and reached for the old notebook in the back office. I reread Rule 1. I hadn't broken the rule, but I felt like I'd come close to something I didn't want to understand. It had been quiet for most of the night. The kind of silence that didn't feel normal, like the whole place was holding its breath. The walk-in freezer had always been wrong. Not just cold, impossibly cold. The kind of cold that sticks to your skin and makes your joints ache. The kind that makes you question if your body is truly in control of itself. Every time I went in there, it felt like something was watching. Like the freezer itself was a sentient being, quietly observing me, waiting for something. As I went through the inventory, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in there. The stacks of frozen meat were more organized than usual, too organized. The plastic wrap was so thin it looked almost transparent, as though it wasn't plastic at all. It felt wrong, like something inhuman had touched it. I kept my focus on the task, trying to push the strange feeling out of my mind when it happened. A soft tap. It wasn't the sound of something falling or a shift in the equipment. It was the sound of knuckles against metal. Tap, 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 precise, measured, like the knock of a child. But something about it made my stomach turn. The rule echoed in my mind. If you hear a knock on the freezer door, slide a single fry under it. Do not open it. I didn't even hesitate. My hand trembled, but I reached for a fry. It was golden, crisp, perfect, just like the ones we always served. My fingers felt numb as I bent to slide it under the door. Then I saw it. The floor beneath the freezer door was wet. Not water, something darker. It gleamed like oil, but it wasn't moving like liquid. It was thick, slow-moving, almost alive in the way it spread. It wasn't blood, but it looked like it. My breath caught as I slid the fry beneath the door, feeling a sudden pressure under my chest. There was no resistance as the fry disappeared. It was like it was absorbed into the darkness beneath the door. The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't quiet. It was a kind of quiet where you could hear every creak in the building, where even your breath feels loud. Then came the second knock. Knock, 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 louder, more deliberate. The sound was too precise, like it was counting down, marking the seconds that passed. Each knock felt like it was meant to test me, test my resolve. And then the door handle rattled. Not like it had before, with a little shake. This was different. It rattled in a way that felt mechanical, like something with purpose behind it. Back and forth, and then the floor shifted beneath the door. Something began to leak from under it. Not liquid, not solid, something in between, something that felt alive. It spread slowly, leaving behind frost where it touched the floor. Tiny frozen teardrops dotted the trail, glinting in the freezer's pale light. A voice emerged. It wasn't from inside the freezer. It wasn't from outside either. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. One fry isn't enough. The voice was high-pitched, sounding like a child, but something in it was wrong. It was too old, too aware of things it shouldn't have been. It was like a child's voice that had been worn down by time, by something ancient. The freezer door shuddered, vibrating with a deep hum, as if the metal was breathing. I could smell the familiar stench of freezer burn, but there was something else too. Something older, like rot mixed with the cold scent of death. "I know you're watching," the voice continued. "I've been watching longer." And that's when I saw it. A small hand, a pale bluish hand with fingers too long, began to appear beneath the door. It was impossibly thin, almost skeletal, but with an eerie, unnatural smoothness to it. It crawled out slowly, each finger stretching out like it was testing the air around it. I froze. The rule had been clear: do not open the door. But I could feel something pulling at me, something alive on the other side. It wanted me to move, to react. I knew I shouldn't. I knew the rules, but this wasn't just a rule anymore. This was something far worse. And whatever was inside the freezer, it was hungry. After that, the fryer clicked on by itself at exactly 3:14 a.m. At first, it was just a sound, sharp and sudden, like an electric snap in the air. But then the oil started bubbling, louder than I had ever heard it. It wasn't the usual gentle crackle you hear when fries start cooking. No, this was something else, louder, deeper. The bubbles sounded more like a heartbeat, pounding with an intensity that set my teeth on edge. And the smell that followed, it wasn't right. It was thick, greasy, yes, but there was a strange sweetness to it, like syrup or burnt sugar. It clung to the air, making it harder to breathe. It was almost sickening. I was standing at the counter, mop in hand, when I noticed it. The fryer wasn't just bubbling, it was boiling. The surface of the oil was churning, more violently than it should have been. I stepped closer, curiosity and dread battling in my chest. At first I thought it was just a few fries floating in the oil, sizzling away like usual. But then something started to rise. It wasn't just fries, it was a form, dark, greasy, and moving, too fast, too fluid. A shape emerged, twisting upward from the depths of the fryer, pulling itself out of the bubbling oil like it was made of the very stuff. At first, it was hard to comprehend what I was looking at, but slowly it took shape, limbs, twisted potato strips that were somehow bending and reshaping as if they had a mind of their own. And then, the eyes oozing with oil. The thing wasn't just fries anymore, it was alive. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest, but the thing was quicker. Its limbs, made of twisted, overcooked fries, began to move, jerking and cracking like an old marionette. It was wrong. Every movement was sharp, sudden, unnatural. The fryer crackled as it slowly dragged itself out of the oil, its oily form sliding onto the counter. Its eyes found me, empty, hollow, but somehow aware, and they were staring right at me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. The whole scene felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare I couldn't escape. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled to think. Then, I remembered the salt shaker sitting next to the register. I didn't even think. I grabbed it and hurled it at the creature. It struck its oily skin, and for a moment, there was nothing. Then, a terrible screech filled the room, sharp, raw, and filled with pain. The creature shuddered violently, its entire body writhing in agony, before collapsing into a pile of burnt, limp fries. The oil splashed and sizzled, but the creature was no more, just a heap of charred potato pieces, laying lifeless on the counter. And then, silence. The fryer stopped bubbling, the hum of the oil fading into nothing. The room felt heavier somehow, like the air had changed, grown denser. It was over. But I knew deep down that it wasn't over. That thing, whatever it wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just some weird glitch in the fryer. Something was wrong with this place. Something was wrong with me for still being here. I stood there for a long time, staring at the pile of burnt fries, my heart still pounding. The salt shaker lay on the counter, a reminder of how close I had come to something I didn't fully understand, something that had no place in a restaurant, or anywhere else for that matter. But I couldn't just leave. Not yet. Something told me I wasn't done with this place, and this place sure as hell wasn't done with me. The Ronald McDonald statue had been in the same spot, tucked away in the far corner of the dining room, ever since I started working here. I never really gave it much thought. Just another creepy relic, I figured. But there was something about it, something unsettling in the way it was frozen in that big, goofy grin. Every time I passed, I tried to ignore it, pretending it was just another odd part of the job. That night, however, was different. I don't know what made me notice it, but as I walked past, I saw it. The statue had shifted. It wasn't subtle. Its head, once turned forward in that stiff, frozen smile, was now staring directly at me. Its eyes, those glassy, lifeless eyes, were fixed on mine, unblinking. I froze. No way. I had been working alone in the store for hours, and I was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion pressing in on me. Maybe I was imagining things. I quickly glanced away and tried to shake it off. But then, Rule 4 surfaced in my mind like a dark whisper. If the statue moves, leave the store for exactly 5 minutes. Do not look back through the glass. The rule was clear, but in that moment, I thought about just ignoring it. After all, it was probably nothing. Maybe the position of the statue just shifted a little over time. I was tired, right? Still, something gnawed at me. My body tensed, like it knew something wasn't right. I glanced back, almost out of habit, and that's when it hit me. The statue's head hadn't just shifted, it had followed me. I was walking away when its eyes shifted with me, tracking my every step. The faint light above it cast shadows across its painted face, making the smile stretch unnaturally wide. The longer I stood there, the more I could swear the grin looked more like a sneer, like it knew something I didn't. That was enough for me. I didn't even think. I just turned and bolted. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I had to get out of there, away from that damn thing. I pushed through the door, my hands shaking as I pulled it open. For a split second, I thought I might be free of it. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I froze again. The statue wasn't by the window anymore. It was standing at the door, just inside the threshold, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It was as if it had been waiting, just waiting for me to come back inside. And worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was smiling. No, grinning. A twisted expression that didn't belong on anything that wasn't alive. My blood ran cold, and I didn't think twice. I turned and ran, without looking back. Rule 4 wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It was my only chance to survive. I didn't look back once I left. My feet barely touched the ground as I ran down the street, my mind racing. The only thing I could focus on was the feeling that I wasn't alone, like the statue was still watching me, even from a distance. My heart hammered in my chest, and I didn't dare slow down until I was sure I was far enough away. When the 5 minutes were finally up, I forced myself to go back. The rule was the rule, and I had to follow it. The idea of ignoring it made my skin crawl. I knew, deep down, that if I didn't, I might never leave this place at all. I took a long breath and headed back, my legs shaking with every step. As I approached the door, my stomach dropped. I almost expected the statue to be back at the window or at the door, waiting for me again. But when I pushed the door open, the store was eerily silent. The statue was exactly where it had been before, standing still in the corner as if nothing had happened. No glowing eyes, no twisted grin. It was just there, lifeless and cold. I stepped inside cautiously, wondering if maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down I knew better. As I moved toward the back office, my hand brushing against the counter, my mind was racing. There was a gnawing sense that I'd missed something, that there was a deeper layer to this. The statue wasn't just a creepy decoration. And the freezer, the fryer, they weren't just ordinary kitchen equipment. I walked into the back office and my eyes fell on the notebook. I had tried to ignore it, but now it felt necessary to know. The eerie rules in the notebook weren't just a list to keep me in check. They were a pattern. I sat down at the small desk, picking it up again. The pages, now crinkled and brittle from my previous handling, seemed more alive in my hands. That's when I began to realize something terrifying. The more I read, the more I could feel a connection between the rules and the places around the restaurant. There was something ancient in the way the words seemed to echo. They weren't just warnings. They were the bindings, the chains that kept something contained. The freezer, the fryer, the statue. They weren't random. They were part of a larger system, each one an anchor, a tool in a mechanism meant to trap whatever had been imprisoned here. And the rules, they weren't just for safety. They were the foundation of the curse. Every single worker who had ever been here, each one who had worked the night shift, had become a piece of that system, feeding it, anchoring it. I realized then I wasn't the first to follow these rules. The notebook wasn't just a guide. It was a ledger, recording the others, the ones who had been here before me. Workers who were now gone, wiped from existence, their memories and names erased. Trapped, just like the thing in the freezer or the thing watching me through the Ronald McDonald statue. As the weight of the realization hit me, I felt the air grow colder. My fingers trembled as I turned the page, reading faster now. It was then that I saw it, the warning that made everything fall into place. They are not just rules. They are the chains. Break them, and you release what's inside. And that's when I understood. The workers, the ones whose names had faded from history, were never meant to leave. The rules weren't meant to keep us safe. They were meant to contain whatever it was lurking within this place. I had to break the rule. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. I had to know what would happen. The knocking came again, softer this time, but still persistent. It felt deliberate, like it was calling to me. The rule echoed in my mind, louder than ever. If you hear a knock on the freezer door, slide a single fry under it. Do not open it. I had followed it to the notebook until now, but the sound, it felt too personal, too urgent. I grabbed another fry, my hands trembling, the weight of what I was about to do heavy on my chest. Slowly I slid it under the freezer door, the cold seeping into my skin as I bent down. But the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it intensified. Faster, louder, a frantic, rhythmic tapping, as though whatever was on the other side of the door was growing impatient. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible through the frosted glass of the freezer door. At first, it was just a shadow, but as it moved closer, I could make out the details. The ragged clothes, torn at the edges, the skin pale and stretched. The eyes, those eyes, they glowed, a sickly green that seemed to pierce the darkness, watching me with an unblinking stare. Its mouth was unnaturally wide, lips pulled back into a grotesque smile, revealing teeth too sharp, too white. The figure pressed its face against the glass. Its breath fogged up the frosted surface, and then its long, pale fingers tapped against the glass, each tap deliberate and slow, as if counting. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear twisted inside me, pulling at my insides, gnawing at me like a hungry animal. I couldn't just stand there anymore, couldn't just keep following the rule. I had to know what was on the other side of that door. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I turned the handle and yanked the freezer door open. The blast of cold that hit me felt like ice straight to the bone, sharper than I had ever felt before. My breath came out in clouds of vapor, the temperature dropping so fast it felt like my skin was freezing in place. And there, standing in the dark of the freezer, was the thing. It grinned wider, its sickly green eyes flashing, and before I could even move, it lunged. Its cold, bony fingers clamped down on me, dragging me inside. The freezer door slammed shut behind me with a sickening finality, plunging me into complete darkness. The last thing I heard, right before the world went black, was its voice, dry, raspy, and dripping with malice, whispering in my ear, "You shouldn't have broken the rule." The moment I broke the rule, I became part of the system, just like all the others before me. I don't know how long it's been. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. The fryer still bubbles, the freezer still knocks, and the statue still watches with those unblinking eyes. But now, I watch too. I'm one of the shadows now. I don't know what horror lingers in this particular remote area restaurant, but I can tell you, it's not the same everywhere. Most McDonald's are just that, fast food joints. People come and go, laughing over fries, sipping sodas, rushing through the drive-thru without a second thought. There's no darkness in those places, no whispers in the freezers, no statues that move when you aren't looking. But here, this one, it's different. It stands alone on the outskirts of town, too far from the main roads, surrounded by empty fields and silence. No one questions why it's always hiring, why the employees never last, why the lights flicker at odd hours, even when nothing is wrong with the wiring. This place isn't a restaurant. It's a trap. Something ancient and hungry lurks beneath its fluorescent glow, hidden behind the smell of grease and cheap coffee. The rules aren't precautions, they're chains, barely holding it in place. And when someone breaks them, something shifts, something stirs. I can feel it now, in the air, in the walls, in the way the shadows stretch just a little too far after midnight. The others, they're just McDonald's. But this one is alive. I linger in the corners of the restaurant, just beyond the glow of the flickering lights. I feel the weight of the rules pressing down on me, binding me to this place. The customers don't see me, but the employees, sometimes they catch glimpses, a reflection in the freezer glass, a figure standing too still in the stockroom, a breath of cold air when no door has been opened. I tried to fight it at first, tried to scream, but my voice is just a whisper in the grease-stained walls now, lost in the hum of the deep fryers and the buzz of the old menu screens. And soon, someone else will come. A new worker, someone desperate for a paycheck, thinking this is just another late-night shift at a fast food joint. They'll find the rules, just like I did. And maybe, just maybe, they'll follow them. Or maybe they'll break one, and when they do, I'll be waiting. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.